The bullet missed Isaac Novak's head by inches, and he barely flinched anymore because death had stopped frightening him 6 months ago when cholera took his wife and 2 daughters within a week of each other. He sat in the saloon in Fort Laramie, Wyoming, watching the commotion around the card table with empty eyes, nursing a whiskey that tasted like ash in his mouth, wondering why God had let him survive when everyone he loved had been buried in unmarked graves outside of Kansas City. The year was 1876, and the frontier town bustled with soldiers from the nearby fort, trappers and settlers heading west. But Isaac felt invisible among them, a ghost haunting the living world with no purpose left to anchor him to it. The doors of the saloon burst open with such force that even Isaac looked up from his drink. A woman stumbled inside, her dress torn and blackened with soot, her auburn hair wild around a face streaked with ash and tears. She collapsed against the doorframe, gasping for breath, and the entire saloon fell silent as men turned to stare at this apparition who looked like she had walked straight out of hell itself. "Please," she choked out, her voice raw from smoke. "My family, the homestead, fire, they are all gone." Isaac found himself standing before he realized he had moved, his legs carrying him toward her while his mind remained numb. He caught her as she swayed, her body trembling violently against his chest. She smelled of smoke and grief, and something in that scent pierced through the fog that had surrounded his heart for half a year. "Easy now," he heard himself say, his voice rusty from disuse. "I have got you." Her eyes met his, and they were the color of honey shot through with green, currently red-rimmed and wild with shock. "They burned," she whispered. "My parents, my brother. The house collapsed before I could reach them. I was at the creek fetching water, and when I turned around, everything was flames." The bartender brought water, and Isaac guided her to a chair, kneeling beside her while she drank with shaking hands. Other men gathered around, asking questions, but Isaac waved them back with an authority he had not exercised in months. He had been a lawman once, before grief had stripped him of ambition and purpose. Now those instincts flickered back to life like embers in cold ash. "When did this happen?" he asked gently. "This morning. Just after dawn, I ran here. I did not know where else to go." She looked around the saloon with growing panic, realizing she was surrounded by strangers in a rough establishment. "I should not be here. I should not have come to town. I should have stayed. I should have saved them." "There was nothing you could have done," Isaac said, and the words came from a place of deep knowing. "When fire takes hold like that, all you can do is survive. You did the right thing by running." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something passed between them that was recognition without familiarity. Two people who understood the weight of loss in a way that others could not. "What is your name?" he asked. "Penelope. Penelope Rogers." Her voice was steadier now, though tears still tracked clean lines through the soot on her cheeks. "We had a homestead about 5 miles east of here. We have been there for 3 years trying to make something of the land. I am Isaac Novak," he said, "and I am going to help you." He did not know why he made that promise. He had not helped anyone in months, had barely helped himself. But something in Penelope Rogers's devastated face called to the part of him that had once believed in protecting people, in standing between the innocent and harm. Even if he had failed his own family, perhaps he could do this one thing right. Isaac arranged for Penelope to stay at the boarding house run by Martha Hendricks, a widow who asked no questions and showed only kindness. He paid for a week in advance with money he had been slowly drinking away, and walked Penelope through the darkening streets while she moved like a sleepwalker beside him. "You should rest," he said at the door to the boarding house. "Tomorrow I will ride out to your homestead and see what can be salvaged." "There will be nothing," she said flatly. I saw it burning. The whole structure collapsed. Even so, you will need to know what happened to have some kind of closure." He hesitated, then added, "And there will need to be burials." She flinched as if he had struck her, but then nodded slowly. "Will you help me with that too?" "Yes." "Why?" The question was stark and direct. "You do not know me. I have nothing to offer you in return." Isaac was quiet for a long moment. "Because 6 months ago, my wife and daughters died of cholera in Kansas City, and I buried them alone while neighbors closed their doors in fear of contagion. I know what it is to face that kind of loss with no one standing beside you. I would not wish that on anyone else." Penelope's expression softened into something that was both sympathy and shared understanding. "I am sorry for your loss, and I am sorry for yours." They stood in the gathering darkness, two broken people connected by the thinnest thread of human compassion, and for the first time in months, Isaac felt something other than numbness. It was pain, yes, but it was also purpose. The next morning, Isaac borrowed a wagon and rode out to the Rogers homestead with Penelope beside him. She sat rigid on the bench, her hands clenched in her lap, dressed in a simple brown dress that Martha Hendricks had provided. As they crested the last hill, the blackened remains of the homestead came into view, and Penelope made a sound that was half sob, half gasp. The house had indeed collapsed entirely, leaving only a few scorched timbers jutting up like broken bones. The barn was gone too, and what had once been fenced pasture was now just charred grass and ash. The smell of smoke still hung heavy in the air. Isaac helped Penelope down from the wagon, keeping a hand on her elbow as she swayed. "You do not have to do this," he said. "I can handle it alone." "No," she said firmly. "They were my family. I will not hide from this." Together they approached the ruins. The morning sun beat down mercilessly, and flies had already begun to gather. Isaac had seen death before, had dealt with its aftermath in his years as a lawman, but the sight of what remained made his stomach turn. He positioned himself to block Penelope's view as much as possible. "3 people, you said? Your parents and brother?" "Yes." "My father was 48, my mother 45. My brother Samuel was 20. Her voice was mechanical, reciting facts to keep emotion at bay. "I am 22. I was the oldest." Isaac worked through the hot morning, carefully recovering what remained while Penelope sat in the wagon, her face turned away but her presence steadfast. He found a spot under the few surviving cottonwood trees near the creek where the earth was soft enough to dig, and he spent hours in the labor of making 3 graves deep enough to protect against scavengers. Penelope helped him lower the wrapped remains into the ground, and then she stood over the graves with her hands folded and spoke in a clear voice that only trembled once or twice. "We came west for a better life," she said. "My father believed in this land, in what we could build here. My mother made our house a home even when it was just rough timber and dirt floors. Samuel was learning the livestock, planning to expand the herd. They worked so hard. They deserved more time." She paused, tears streaming freely now. "I do not understand why this happened. I do not understand why I am the only one left. But I will remember them every day of my life. I will remember how my father laughed at his own jokes, how my mother sang while she cooked, how Samuel always gave me the best portion of whatever we had. They were good people. They deserved better than this." Isaac stood beside her in respectful silence, his hat in his hands. When she finished, he helped her place stones to mark each grave, and she carved their names into rough wooden markers with a knife and tears. They returned to Fort Laramie as the sun began to set, both exhausted and filthy with soot and dirt. Isaac left Penelope at the boarding house and went to the saloon, but for the first time in months, he did not drink himself into oblivion. He sat with a single whiskey, and thought about the woman with honey-green eyes who had walked into his dead life and reminded him that other people suffered too. That grief was not his alone to carry. Over the following days, Isaac found himself checking on Penelope regularly. He helped her file the necessary papers to claim ownership of the land, though the homestead itself was a total loss. He sat with her while she went through the few salvaged items he had managed to pull from the ruins. A scorched photograph, her mother's wedding ring, a leather journal that had survived because it was in the barn rather than the house. "What will you do now?" he asked one afternoon as they sat on the porch of the boarding house. "I do not know," Penelope admitted. "I have no family left, no money beyond what little my father had saved, and that was not much. The land is worthless without a house or barn or equipment." She looked at him with those remarkable eyes. "What did you do after you lost your family?" "I drank," Isaac said honestly. "I wandered. I came west because I could not stand to be in Kansas City anymore, where every street corner reminded me of them. I thought distance might help, but grief travels with you no matter how far you run." "Does it get easier?" He considered that carefully. "Not easier, but different. The sharpness fades eventually, leaving something more like an ache. You learn to live with it the way you learn to live with an old injury that pains you in cold weather." Penelope was quiet for a while. "I keep thinking I should have been there. If I had been in the house instead of at the creek, maybe I could have woken them sooner, gotten them out. Or you would be dead too, and no one would be left to remember them," Isaac said. "I have thought the same things about my family. Why did I not notice the symptoms sooner? Why did I not force them to leave the city when cholera first broke out? But those thoughts lead nowhere good. We cannot change the past, no matter how much we wish we could." "How do you bear it?" Her voice was very small. "The knowing that they are gone and you are still here." Isaac looked out at the dusty street, watching people go about their business, living their ordinary lives. "Honestly, I did not bear it well for a long time. I stopped caring about anything, including myself. But these past few days, helping you, it has reminded me that there is still purpose to be found. That maybe the way to honor the dead is not to join them in the grave, but to keep living as best we can." Penelope reached over and took his hand, her fingers small and warm in his calloused palm. "Thank you for helping me. I do not think I could have survived this alone." "You are stronger than you know," Isaac said, "but you do not have to be alone, not if you do not want to be." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition that they had become important to each other in ways that transcended simple kindness. Two people who had lost everything had found something fragile and new in each other's company, like green shoots pushing up through burned ground. As the weeks passed, Isaac and Penelope spent more time together. He taught her how to shoot, reasoning that a woman alone on the frontier needed to know how to protect herself. They rode out to the land sometimes, and she showed him where she had planned to plant a garden, where her brother had wanted to build a bigger barn. The property began to feel less like a graveyard and more like a possibility, though neither of them spoke of it directly. Isaac found work as a deputy marshal, his old skills returning as his interest in life slowly rekindled. Penelope took a job at the general store, her quick mind and neat handwriting making her valuable for keeping accounts. They fell into a routine of meeting for dinner at the boarding house, sitting together on the porch in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. "Tell me about your wife," Penelope said one night, and Isaac was surprised to find that he could. "Her name was Margaret. We married young, both of us barely 20. She was a schoolteacher's daughter, gentle and patient. She made me a better man just by believing I could be one." He smiled sadly. "My daughters were 6 and 8, Lily and Rose. Lily wanted to be a teacher like her grandmother. Rose wanted to run a ranch and raise horses. They were so full of dreams. They sound wonderful. They were. And I failed to protect them. Penelope turned to him with fierce intensity. A disease is not something you can fight with a gun or your fists, Isaac. You could not have stopped cholera any more than I could have stopped that fire. We are not all powerful, no matter how much we wish we were. I know that in my head, Isaac said. My heart is slower to accept it. Mine too, she admitted. I still wake up some nights convinced I hear my mother calling me for breakfast, or my brother teasing me about something. Then I remember, and it is like losing them all over again. Isaac took her hand, and they sat in silence, drawing comfort from the simple fact of not being alone. The first kiss happened on a cool September evening as they walked along the North Platte River. The cottonwoods were beginning to turn gold, and the air smelled of approaching autumn. They had been discussing whether Penelope should renew her room at the boarding house for another month or look for something more permanent. And somehow the conversation had turned to the future in general, to hopes and fears, and the terrifying prospect of trying to build a life after loss. I never thought I would feel anything again, Isaac said, stopping to look at the river. After Margaret and the girls died, it was like someone had scooped out my insides and left just a shell walking around. But these past weeks with you, I have felt things coming back. Not just the grief, but other things too. Hope, maybe, or the possibility of it. Penelope stood close beside him, her shoulder brushing his arm. I feel it too. I feel guilty about it sometimes, like I am betraying my family by daring to think about the future instead of dwelling on the past. I do not think they would want that for us, Isaac said, turning to face her. I think they would want us to keep living, to find whatever happiness we can. Is that what this is? Penelope asked, looking up at him. Happiness? I do not know yet, Isaac said honestly. But I know that when I am with you, the weight is lighter. The world seems less gray, and I would like to find out what that might become if you are willing. Penelope reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. I am willing, she whispered. When Isaac kissed her, it was gentle and tentative, two people learning how to feel again after long months of numbness. Her lips were soft, and she tasted of the peppermint tea she had drunk with dinner. The kiss was brief, almost chaste, but it felt like a promise, like the first crack in the ice after a hard winter. They pulled apart slowly, and Penelope smiled, a real smile that lit up her whole face. I was afraid I had forgotten how to do that. It seems we both remember, Isaac said, and kissed her again. Courting felt strange at first, weighted down as they both were with grief and loss. But as autumn deepened into winter, Isaac and Penelope found their way forward together. He introduced her to the other deputies and their families, helping her build connections in the community. She encouraged him to write to his sister back east, to rebuild the family ties he had severed in his grief. They attended church socials and town meetings, slowly integrating themselves back into the world of the living. They talked about their lost families often, refusing to let silence and avoidance create distance between them. Isaac told stories about Margaret's terrible cooking when they first married, how she had burned everything until his mother had taken pity on them and given her lessons. Penelope described her father's stubborn optimism, how he had always believed the next year would be better, the next crop more successful. They cried together sometimes, but more often they laughed, celebrating the memories rather than just mourning the loss. I want to rebuild the homestead, Penelope said one cold December evening as they sat in front of the fire in the boarding house parlor. I know it seems foolish, but I cannot stand the thought of that land just sitting there empty, like my family was never there at all. It is not foolish, Isaac said, but it would be a massive undertaking. You would need a house, a barn, equipment, livestock. The cost would be substantial. I know. I have been saving every penny from the store, but it would take years to accumulate enough." She looked at him with determination in her eyes. "But I want to try. I want to build something that would have made them proud." Isaac was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. Then he said, "What if you did not have to do it alone?" Penelope's breath caught. "Isaac, I could not ask you to spend your money on my dream. You are not asking. I am offering." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Penelope, these past months with you have given me something I thought I had lost forever, a reason to care about tomorrow. I have money saved from my years as a lawman, enough to make a real difference, and I have been thinking about what I want my life to look like going forward." "What do you want it to look like?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to build something lasting. Something that honors both our families by creating new life and new hope. I want to wake up every morning with purpose, and I want to do all of that with you if you will have me." He squeezed her hands gently. "Penelope Rogers, will you marry me? Will you let me help you rebuild your homestead and make it ours together?" Tears spilled down Penelope's cheeks, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Isaac, I will marry you." They were married in January of 1877 in the small church in Fort Laramie, with Martha Hendricks and the other deputies as witnesses. Penelope wore a simple blue dress, and Isaac wore his best suit, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared felt like both an ending and a beginning. The ghosts of their first family stood witness too, Isaac thought, not haunting but blessing this fragile new happiness they had found together. They spent their wedding night at the boarding house, and when Isaac made love to his new wife, it was with a tenderness born of long grief and new hope. Penelope was both nervous and eager, and afterward they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, talking in whispers about the future. "I am frightened," she admitted. "Frightened that something will happen to take this away, that I am not allowed to be this happy after what happened." "I am frightened too," Isaac said, stroking her hair. "But I think we have to try anyway. We have to believe that we deserve this, that our families would want us to have this." "You think Margaret would approve of me?" Isaac considered carefully. "I think she would be glad I found someone who understands grief but is not defeated by it. Someone strong and brave and determined to keep living despite everything. Yes, I think she would approve." "And I think my family would like you," Penelope said. "My father always said the measure of a man was how he treated people who could not help him in return. You helped me when I had nothing to offer you but grief and burden. That speaks to who you are." They began work on the homestead in early spring, as soon as the ground thawed enough to build. Isaac had hired a crew of workers, and together they cleared the burned timbers and began construction of a new house. This one was larger than the original, with 2 bedrooms and a real kitchen, and windows that faced east to catch the morning sun. Penelope threw herself into the work with fierce determination, insisting on helping despite Isaac's concerns. She painted walls and hung curtains, and planted a kitchen garden in the spot where she had once planned to plant vegetables with her mother. Every nail driven, every board laid, felt like an act of defiance against the fire that had tried to erase her family from the earth. By summer, the house was finished, and they moved in with a mixture of joy and sorrow. That first night, sitting on the porch and watching the sun set over the land, Penelope was quiet for a long time. "Are you all right?" Isaac asked. "I keep thinking they should be here," she said softly. "My parents should be seeing what we built. Samuel should be helping us stock the barn with horses. It feels wrong to be happy when they are not here to share it." Isaac put his arm around her shoulders. "I understand. I thought the same thing when I watched you walk down the aisle at our wedding. I thought about how Margaret should be there to see that I had found someone else who made me want to be a better man, How my daughters should be there to dance at the reception and eat too much cake. He paused. But then I realized that carrying them in my heart, remembering them, honoring their memory by living fully, that was the best I could do. They are not here in body, but they are part of why we are who we are. We would not be the people who found each other if we had not loved them first. Penelope leaned her head on his shoulder. When did you become so wise? When I married a woman brave enough to rebuild her life from ashes, Isaac said, and kissed the top of her head. The years that followed were good ones, marked by hard work and growing prosperity. They raised cattle and horses, and Isaac's reputation as a fair and honest man brought them business from throughout the territory. Penelope kept the books and managed the household, and occasionally helped Isaac with his martial duties when he needed someone who could speak gently to frightened victims or angry settlers. They had weathered the first winter in the new house when Penelope discovered she was pregnant. The news brought both joy and terror in equal measure. They had not spoken much about children, both of them wary of tempting fate, of daring to hope for too much. What if something goes wrong? Penelope asked, her hand on her still flat belly. What if I lose the baby? What if something happens to me? Isaac knelt in front of her, taking her hands. We cannot live our lives in fear of what might happen. Yes, there are risks. Yes, terrible things occur that are beyond our control. But we have already survived the worst that life could throw at us, and we are still here. We are still fighting. We have to believe that we are allowed to have this. I am so frightened, she whispered. I know, so am I, but we will face it together just like we have faced everything else. The pregnancy was difficult, with Penelope sick for months and weak throughout. Isaac fretted constantly, hovering over her and calling the doctor at the slightest concern. But as summer turned to autumn and Penelope's belly grew round and full, hope began to outweigh fear. Their son was born on a cold November night in 1878, arriving early and small but fierce and determined. Isaac caught him as the midwife guided him into the world, and when the baby let out his first angry cry, Isaac wept openly with relief and overwhelming emotion. We have a son, he said, placing the baby in Penelope's exhausted arms. Penelope, we have a son. She looked down at the tiny, red-faced infant and smiled through tears. He is perfect. He is absolutely perfect. They named him Samuel James Novak, honoring both Penelope's brother and Isaac's father. Little Sam had his mother's eyes and his father's strong will, making his presence known from the very first day. Isaac found himself terrified and amazed in equal measure, this tiny life so fragile and precious in his rough hands. I forgot how small they are, he said one night, holding Sam while Penelope rested. My daughters were never this tiny in my memory, but they must have been once. Does it hurt? Penelope asked gently. Being reminded of them, Isaac considered. It aches, yes, but not in a bad way. More like stretching a muscle that has been idle too long. Sam does not replace them. Nothing could. But he is his own person, his own miracle, and I am grateful beyond words to have him. As Sam grew from infant to toddler, the homestead prospered. They hired a few ranch hands and expanded their herds. The house that had been built from the ashes of tragedy became filled with the sounds of life. Sam's laughter, the ringing of the dinner bell, friends gathering for meals and celebrations. Isaac and Penelope made a point of telling Sam about the family members he would never meet. They showed him the graves under the cottonwood trees and told him stories about his grandparents and uncle who had dreamed of making this land flourish. They spoke of Isaac's first wife and daughters too, making sure Sam understood that love did not end with death, that he was part of a larger story of survival and hope. Did you love them more than you love us? Sam asked one day when he was about 5 years old, with the blunt curiosity of childhood. Isaac and Penelope exchanged glances, and Isaac knelt down to be at eye level with his son. "I loved them differently," he said carefully. "Just like I love you and your mother differently. Love is not a pie where each person gets a smaller piece because there are more people sharing it. Love grows to fit whoever needs it. I love your mother with all my heart, and I love you more than I can say. And I still love the family I lost, because they were part of making me who I am." "Does that make sense?" Sam thought about it seriously, then nodded. "I think so. Like how I can love both the old barn cat and the new puppy," Isaac laughed. "Exactly like that." When Sam was 6, Penelope gave birth to twin daughters, Rose Margaret and Lily Ann, named for Isaac's first daughters with Penelope's blessing. The births were easier this time, and the girls were healthy and strong from the start. Isaac held both of them in the hours after they were born and felt a sense of completeness that he had never expected to experience again. "Our family," Penelope said, exhausted but radiant as she watched Isaac with the babies. "We built this, Isaac. Against all odds, we built something beautiful." "We did," he agreed, "and they would be proud of us, all of them." The years continued to pass in the rhythm of ranch life. Sam grew tall and strong, taking to horses like his uncle had before him. The twins were inseparable, different as night and day in temperament but devoted to each other. Isaac served as marshal for another decade, before retiring to focus full-time on the ranch. Penelope became known throughout the county for her kindness and her willingness to help families in need, never forgetting what it was like to have nothing. They expanded the house as the children grew, adding rooms and a wide wraparound porch where they spent summer evenings watching the sun set over the land that had cost so much, but given back so much more. The homestead became a gathering place for neighbors and friends, known for Penelope's generous table and Isaac's quiet wisdom. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Isaac and Penelope rode out to the graves under the cottonwood trees. The wooden markers had been replaced with proper headstones years ago, and the grass grew green and thick over the plots. They stood hand in hand, and Penelope spoke to her family as she did every year on this date. "We are still here," she said. "The land you worked so hard for is thriving. We have 3 children who are growing up strong and good. The house is filled with love and laughter. I hope you know that every good thing we built in your honor. You are not forgotten. You never will be." Isaac added his own quiet words, speaking to Margaret and his daughters. "I found a way forward," he told them. "I found someone who understood grief and chose hope anyway. Our children know your names and your stories. You are part of their history, part of what made them possible. I hope I have honored your memory by living as fully as I could." They stood in silence for a while, and then Penelope said, "Do you think they are together somehow? Your family and mine, watching over us?" "I do not know," Isaac said honestly. "But I like to think that if there is something beyond this life, they are glad we found each other. That they are happy we survived and thrived and built something worth having. We nearly did not make it," Penelope reflected. "If that fire had happened a few weeks earlier or later, I might have been in the house. If you had not been in that saloon the day I stumbled in. If you had been too lost in your own grief to care about a stranger's pain. But it did not happen that way," Isaac said. "We were both in the right place at the right time, even though it felt like the worst possible moment, and we chose to help each other instead of drowning alone. That is worth something." "It is worth everything," Penelope said and kissed him. As they rode back to the house, they saw their children playing in the yard. Sam was teaching the twins how to rope a fence post, and their laughter carried on the wind. The house stood solid and strong, smoke rising from the chimney in a welcoming plume. Cattle grazed in the pastures, and horses ran in the corrals. It was a scene of prosperity and peace, built by two people who had every reason to give up, but chose to keep fighting instead. "I am so grateful," Penelope said as they approached the barn, "for all of it. The pain and the healing, the loss and the finding, the grief and the joy, it all led us here." "No regrets?" Isaac asked. "How could I regret anything that brought me to this moment?" Penelope smiled at him, her face lined now with age but still beautiful in his eyes. "I would not change a single thing if it meant not having you and our children and this life we have made." That night, after the children were in bed, Isaac and Penelope sat on the porch as they had done thousands of times before. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the night was peaceful. They sat close together, Penelope's head on Isaac's shoulder, his arm around her waist. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Penelope asked. "When I stumbled into the saloon looking like death itself, I said I had you," Isaac recalled, "and I meant it." "You kept that promise," Penelope said softly. "Through everything you have had me. Held me up when I wanted to fall, given me strength when I had none of my own, loved me when I could barely remember how to love myself." "You did the same for me," Isaac said. "You reminded me that life was worth living, that it was possible to survive the worst loss and still find reasons to smile. You gave me purpose again when I had none." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. An owl hooted in the distance. A calf called for its mother. Inside the house, one of the twins was singing softly to herself before sleep. "I am so glad you walked into that saloon," Isaac said. "Even though it was the worst day of your life, even though you had just lost everything, I am grateful that your path crossed mine when it did." "So am I," Penelope said. "We found something to live for together. We found each other." As the years continued, Sam took over more of the ranch operations, proving himself a capable and thoughtful manager. The twins grew into young women, Rose wanting to be a teacher like the grandmother she never knew, Lily planning to study medicine and return to serve the community. Isaac and Penelope stepped back gradually, content to let the next generation take the lead while they enjoyed the fruits of their decades of labor. They grew old together on the land that had seen such tragedy and such triumph. Their hair turned gray, their steps slowed, but the love between them never diminished. If anything, it deepened with each passing year, each shared memory. Each morning they woke up beside each other and chose gratitude over bitterness. On their 30th anniversary, the whole family gathered at the homestead for a celebration. Neighbors came from miles around, and the house was filled to bursting with people and food and laughter. Sam and his new wife were expecting their first child, making Isaac and Penelope grandparents. Rose had just accepted a teaching position at the Fort Laramie school. Lily was preparing to leave for medical school back east. As the sun set and the party wound down, Isaac pulled Penelope away from the crowd and led her to their spot by the cottonwood trees. The graves were well tended as always, and fresh flowers had been placed there earlier in the day. 30 years, Isaac said, shaking his head in wonder. "When I met you, I could not imagine 30 more days of living, let alone 30 years of happiness." "We have been blessed," Penelope said. "More than we probably deserved after the way we both wanted to give up in the beginning. We were allowed to be blessed because we refused to give up," Isaac corrected gently. "We chose to keep going even when it seemed impossible. We chose to help each other and build something together. That took courage." Penelope looked at the graves, then back at the house where their family was gathered. "They are all here with us, you know. Every person we lost, they are woven into everything we built. This ranch exists because my family homesteaded this land. Our marriage exists because you had learned how to love from Margaret and lost enough to recognize grief in someone else. Our children have the names and stories of those who came before. Nothing is lost, not really. It just transforms into something new. Isaac pulled her close and kissed her forehead. You have always been wiser than me. I just had more time to think about it while I was keeping the books, Penelope teased, and he laughed. They walked back to the house together, arms around each other. Two people who had started as strangers bound by grief and become partners in building a life worth living. Behind them, the graves rested peacefully in the twilight, the cottonwood trees standing guard over the memories of those who had made everything possible. Years later, when Isaac was 72 and Penelope 70, they sat on the porch on a warm summer evening and watched their grandchildren play in the yard. There were 5 now, with another on the way. The homestead had grown into one of the most successful ranches in Wyoming, and the Novak name was respected throughout the territory. You think we did right by them? Penelope asked, the question she had posed many times over the decades. Our first families, did we honor them properly? Isaac looked at the scene before them, the thriving ranch, the happy children, the legacy of love and hard work that would continue long after they were gone. I think we did more than honor them, he said. I think we proved that their lives and deaths mattered. That the capacity to love they taught us was not wasted. That grief, as terrible as it is, does not have to be the end of the story. It was just the middle, Penelope said softly. The hard middle where everything seemed impossible. But we made it through to the other side, Isaac said. Together, Penelope took his hand, their fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice. I would do it all again, she said. Every painful step, every tear shed, every moment of doubt, I would do it all again if it meant ending up right here with you. As would I, Isaac agreed. They sat as the sun set over the land they had built together, the land that had seen fire and death and rebirth. They sat as their children and grandchildren laughed and played, creating new memories on ground sanctified by old sorrow. They sat as two people who had lost everything and found each other, who had refused to let tragedy define them, who had chosen hope over despair and built a monument to love in the process. The story of Isaac Novak and Penelope Rogers became one told throughout Wyoming for generations. Not just a story of loss, though the losses were real and terrible. Not just a story of love, though the love was deep and true. It was a story of survival and resilience, of two people who met in the darkest moment of their lives and decided that if they could not save those they had lost, they could at least honor them by truly living. They had lost their first families to sickness and fire, but they had found something to live for together. And in finding each other, they had discovered that even the most devastating losses could be transformed into something beautiful, given enough time and courage and love. Years after Isaac passed peacefully in his sleep at 78, and 3 years later when Penelope followed him at 76, they were buried under the cottonwood trees beside the graves they had tended for so many decades. Their children and grandchildren gathered to mourn and celebrate, telling stories of two extraordinary, ordinary people who had refused to let grief win. The homestead continued for generations, the Novak family maintaining the land and the legacy. The house was expanded and updated, but the original structure that Isaac and Penelope built together remained at its heart. The graves under the cottonwoods became a family shrine, a place where descendants came to remember and reflect and give thanks for the courage of those who had come before. And if sometimes, on quiet summer evenings when the wind blew just right through the cottonwood trees, it almost sounded like laughter that seemed fitting, because Isaac and Penelope had filled that land with laughter in the end. They had taken ground marked by tragedy and turned it into a testament to the enduring power of hope. the healing nature of companionship, and the extraordinary capacity of the human heart to love again after devastating loss. Their story proved that even when everything is taken away, even when the future seems impossible and the present unbearable, there is still reason to keep going. There are still hands to hold, still purposes to find, still lives to build. There is still love to be discovered in the most unlikely places, between the most wounded hearts, at the most desperate times. Isaac and Penelope had found each other in the ashes of their old lives and built something new and beautiful together. They had honored their dead by living fully, by choosing joy, by creating a legacy that stretched far beyond their own lifetimes. They had proven that the human spirit, when given compassion and connection and courage, could overcome almost anything. And in the end, that was the greatest gift they left to their descendants. Not just land or wealth or a family name, but the knowledge that love could bloom even in the most barren soil, that hope could take root even in the most scorched earth, and that two broken people could make each other whole again if they were brave enough to try. The story ended not with tragedy, though it had begun there, but with triumph. The triumph of two souls who refused to surrender to grief, who found each other across the vast emptiness of loss, and who built together a life that honored both their past and their future. They had lost everything, but in losing everything, they had found the one thing that mattered most: each other, and the chance to begin again.